Alrighty.
Hey.
And now, I used internet camera. Made one photo.
Yes.
Great.
Made one as
Good
well.
photo.
Yeah.
got the hot dog.
Yeah. Hot dog canoe cherries, whatever it is.
Oh, I didn't look very closely. I just kind of assumed it was like a canoe or something. And
So I mean, it's hard.
Common interpretation.
Yeah. That's funny. Everyone sort of centers around canoe, Sunday, or hot dog.
It's archetypal. Archetypical? Yeah.
What? My computer?
Is that? That's mine. You're hearing mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't. I had to turn.
I could put settings somewhere. It's fine. It's fine.
You have to go into the belly. Anyhow, so what are we doing? Figuring out blocks.
John's getting draft documents prepared.
Yep, we got a Fig Jam and a Google Doc, but if y'all want to use something else, we can whatever makes most sense. And if we all have iPads, we could also do like a shared whiteboard app thing. I've used that before. It's nice. We just figure out what works. Let me move that in. There we go. Now I should be able to edit it.
I'm okay with it.
You can use my computer to type or anything.
Whatever's fine.
Because I'm just going to sketch. I don't know.
I usually just use my iPad at this point. So
okay, it's fine.
This is pretty normal.
Well, let's just maybe just get into it and then see if a surface emerges to use. That's useful. We got them all stacked up. Yeah, so we've been talking a little bit about or in and around what we're doing, I guess, which is like sort of defining the block types or block structure protocol, right? Like I don't know. We've been calling them media Legos. Like, so what defines a Lego? What are the dots and how do they stick together? And, this kind of thing. So I don't know really where to pick up here. Kristen, tell me where to pick up.
Kristen's good at this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So, well, what was, CJ, you had a definition for blocks or like how to define blocks. We also talked about finding a like metaphor to use that we could talk around our project.
Yeah, so the internet camera like structure was really helpful in that.
Yeah.
Like film is this thing that is a connection all the way through from, like an interface all the way through to like something that is on the internet and activated in that ecosystem. And so, so that gave like a sort of metaphor to talk about the whole thing, and film as an object that is sellable and these kinds of things. So that got us thinking a little bit about like kind of what we're doing. An initial start is that there's a concept in here that it's like internet paper, right? Like, and then there are like sort of tools that can write to that paper. It's not right, but it's directionally somewhere in the, because the idea that you can, sort of publish directly from whatever input device and then get that on the internet. And then there's some mediation past that point between public and private, right? So this is publishing, right? Okay, and then, but that sort of more of what we're doing is figuring out some sort of game logic in this that creates an environment. And so what is the metaphor? We started using like sort of the metaphor of like a gaming console and cartridges and these kinds of things to try and structure things. So this is what's up in the air right now. Like, and we can kind of sort of try to fill some of those in. And Shahruz, if you have any like ways to constrain this or anything that pops up, more than welcome. So yeah, so I don't know. Where were we in the game stuff? Does it, like the game cartridge, console, all of that stuff, is that a good on-ramp here, or?
I think at least from that perspective, the game cartridges seemed kind of more well defined in the sense that the cartridge is the game that you are playing. Like that seems like it maps very nicely as you say, okay, you know, we have game 4, which was like, you know, some step 1, some step 2, and you're like kind of iterating through that procedure, like game procedure. But now the kind of console front end, I think Kristen and I and Dave were talking about this morning, is what does that look like? How do you kind of operate within that? What is defining that set of operations?
Yeah, so there's a game protocol there, and then probably, I mean, it's a way to put it into a mental object. And then we were talking about like we went down to the block level, which is where we were going to try to like flesh out some of this, but we can talk that through again, maybe to build the model up. So that basically is some structure that can contain composable like metadata, right? But that are defined by relationship. So, and the protocol is the rules in which these relationships like can be brought about, and you know, and so there is a sort of, there are probably primitives that we can like sort of prop up here that like could interoperate, or there's one primitive, and this is where I'm like sort of trying to feel into it, and then this is where the metaphor of media Legos comes in. Like they are a thing that can snap to other things, that has some interactive quality, some like sensorial like quality, file type, these kinds of things. Yeah, and then those things have the ability to snap together in sort of like a language kind of way. And then the game protocol is the set of behaviors between players, right, that use media Legos to do whatever, right? Media Legos are just the thing that you can do anything with, right? So yeah, and then the console runs that whole thing. Those are that's the big, that's the sketch, I think. So I don't know where in there it makes sense to build things out or try to figure out if there's a better metaphor. Yeah.
When you say snapping the blocks together, is that composing like a post? Is that composing a series of posts, or is it more inside or more outside, or like? Trying to wrap my head around that.
So I think the base level version of this is like blocks. So yeah, the relationship to what we're calling a post and what we're calling blocks, right? We can try to sort of tease that out some. My first instinct is a post is like a set of blocks, like cool, like built in some way that has a, you know, a sort of consistent form. I don't know if that is another block. I don't know. Like this is there's probably a way of thinking about that. That's yeah. So like a block should be like the smallest unit, I guess, of, you know, so in the Lego metaphor, you have like the 1 dot square, right? And that's the simplest form of the thing. Yeah, and then that has information in and of itself, but then in combination with other blocks, it produces a higher order organism. And a higher order organism would be a post. So maybe that's like a multicellular organism versus a single, yeah. Now we've moved over into the metaphor of biology.
One of the things that I'm like, I think, okay, there's two things I'm wondering. One is like, if the conception of a block that I have is also the smallest unit, and I kind of looking at it as just a set of bytes, like anything, like a string, essentially. It could be a photo, it could be whatever. That is a block in and of itself. But like Legos, the fact that it has the little notch on the top of it makes it composable with something else. So what is the thing that we, like, what is the affordance of a block that allows us to compose with other things? Is it just is it a relationship, or is it a pointer? Like, what is that, and how does it, how does it relate? And in having that little piece, how do you kind of string these things together into something larger? Like, what affordance is similar in the way that you can build a castle with Legos, all from just one Lego piece, like one Lego type?
So this is back to our prepositions, I think, or something that is related to the prepositions. In Legos, you have like on, below, like at a right angle, all these kinds of things next to. I think that there's some equivalency here. This is where I get a little lost because I don't know what's being mapped directly. Like if you have a 2D plane and you are presenting a post, you know, like one block on top of another block, stacked, you know, is there something there? If it's a horizontal plane, that has a relational quality. So yeah, I don't, okay, so there's something to that. If that sparks anything in anybody, go for it, because there's something there that I don't really get, but might be helpful.
Would that translate to how a viewer is also consuming the information?
I think so, because there's a shared agreement on placement, right? That like the producer and consumer parties can, you know, like they're exchanging something there, right? Information based on placement is being exchanged, you know? So like, this is very language centric, right? Like, you know, there's a grammar and adherence to that grammar and where it appears in series, all that stuff matters. So, yeah, how opinionated the thing is, I don't know how to make the call on that, like, or if you need to at all, like, yeah.
Why is this so hard to get into?
I'm in it. Yeah, so I mean, well, we can talk about a post then, right? So like you have blocks on a page, like take any post that's out there, right? And like a paragraph a block, like, you know, what is the outer constraint of a block of media? Like, and then what are the coordinating, what is the coordinating function of a membrane, right? Of that, like, what is the outer limits of that thing and how they snap together? So like an image, or an image plus some metadata, like is a block, you know? And what metadata, like pairs or something like that, can relate them to other blocks. So like one of those can be like, I am a block as defined by my relationships. I contain an image, right? And I am near these other things, you know? So I am first in series, I guess, if series is one of the relationship types, or I am above, if that means something, right? And above can be printed out in many different ways. So above can just be a relationship to, right? Or I am paired with, I am entangled, I don't, you know, and then the interface can then decide how to print out nearness or aboveness or whatever. Like that could be they're stacked, or it could be on a 4D plane then defined by color. I don't know. So
I think, well, yeah, one question, I was reading like a tweet thread think a month or so ago, about singly linked lists versus doubly linked lists, which basically just means if you have 2 blocks and you want to link them, there's one format that you could do where it says, just it's the child pointing to the parent and that's it. But the parent doesn't point back to the child. And then you have a doubly linked list, in which case you have the parent linking back to the child and the child linking back to the parent. Git and stuff like Git use a singly linked list, which allows the nature of like forking and branching, because that way you can always go back in time to see the genesis of something. And then if you set up like your indexing properly, you can also see the reverse, but it's just more scalable to have it be singly. But I think it affects a big aspect here of if you have block A and you're saying to the right of block A and say that's metadata stored in block A is block B. Should block B say that to the left of itself is block A, or should it be open to anything saying to my right is block B, and then kind of allow for navigation throughout all the different possible things that might be to its left?
Yeah, what's the upside and downside of these kinds? Anyways, go ahead, John.
Yeah, that makes me think of like the current structure of the internet. It's all one-way links, right? And so even if there's a gajillion things that point to Google, like Google doesn't necessarily know who links to them, and Google themselves had to map that manually. Like they constantly have to reindex to try to build that bidirectional link. So the problem with multiple things pointing to something else is that they can conflict, first of all, and second of all, the thing itself has to go out and figure out what's pointing to it and maintain that map and understand how to parse that. And so if it doesn't know the type of the thing that's pointing to it, it's not going to know what to do with it. And if there are 2 things that essentially say, I'm to the left of block A, and another thing that says, I'm to the left of block A, like who mediates that, basically? But there is this feeling that like maybe like some sort of name spacing, or like I don't want to say hierarchy, but like more about like localism, where a block is only defining its relation like to a certain extent. Like it's not trying to position itself in absolute space. It's only saying like within this context I am relative to this other thing, and like that makes almost the space for like multiple overlapping definitions that kind of change depending on context, and in other words, how they're interpreted changes depending on like what's trying to render it.
Yeah. So rather than an absolute address, it is so okay, maybe I'm not fully understanding. Like, so rather than having like this thing is in this XYZ coordinate structure, next to this thing, it is, so you can have 4 things that are to the right of an object in, like, maybe these are
states.
What's that?
They're like states. The thing has multiple states that are being held somewhere, because it depends on context, like, because it might be to the right for me, but it might be to the left for Shahruz and above for Dave. So we each get to hold on to our own state. I don't know if there's this, the only thing for this like conceptualization of it that I don't understand technically is if there needs to be one main state. I don't like.
It's peer-to-peer. So like each party holds their half of the state or their percentage of the state if it's in a larger relationship, I guess. So like there's some communication that says like there's an agreement. This is where the contracting like model I think kind of comes in. So like down at the base level, it's just like there's the potential for many relationships, but once enacted, both parties, say in a 2 like node relationship, are holding a bit of the quantity that entangles them, right? And that metadata that entangles them has like some positional data, some like what are the relational data between an entangled pair, right? Like, so what's the types of things that you can have there? And then if we just come up with some primitives there, it's possible that we can like start to build some stuff from those primitives, right? or we can come at it from something that's more explicit, like a post, and then try to reverse engineer, like creating a version of this thing that exists with this relational, with the idea that there are probably lots more that you could do weird things with. So I don't know if that adds.
Yeah, like what would be some examples of where you might want to take one block that already exists and either like use some form of transclusion to bring it into a different post, or insert a post to the right of it that may not have been like a part of the original block's intent? Like, I'm just trying to figure out like, yeah, what are some examples like
Quoting,
where those would make sense in different types?
like quoting something in response to it. So maybe either the entire document or like a specific block from that document post.
So maybe I have like a sort of scenario, a role-playing scenario, right? So you've got all of us in a shared like surface, whatever that surface is, and we all have inputs coming in that are producing blocks, right? And so like say, you know, everybody who's sketching now in a notes app or whatever, that is being encoded in this block structure and placed into the repo. And now we have a whole crap load of interchangeable blocks, right? And so one of the games for this can be, like, this is where a game structure would be useful. Like take X blocks and put them into Y container, you know, something like this. Can't hold all that right now, but the general idea being like so say I'm then going through like personally, like first person, like there's a bunch of information that was created from like a call or from a period, and I am just like pulling blocks and putting them in a new something, and then I am rearranging those blocks in some form to produce an output that is legible in some way, right? And so those forms can be anything, right? But in a post, say, like, and then I guess there's some probably additional action on top of that. They're editing or creating annotation or like merging, or I don't, this is where, yeah, this is the transclusion. I don't know if that helped at all. Like,
I mean, annotation is kind of interesting to think of as a relation, as a block that you could define as a relation to another. That I don't know, it seems a little easier to understand than left and right or physical space, at least to start off with for me.
You have a direct correlate there if you have, say, like we've landed on video and audio for this. Like it keeps coming back to that, like as an interface, because we all like listen to podcasts and watch videos and then sort of make notes from this stuff or like do commentary. There's a bunch of different things. And then you have time code as like a coordinating point between the two. And then you have time of day when it was done, and like a bunch of coordinating like stuff that you could capture through a machine pretty easily that would give you some graph, I guess. I don't know. And then each of the blocks in response, like for instance, you could do annotation with text, video, audio, like the file typing can be any of those things, right? So it's like this may be we've popped this one up like 3 or 4 times separately. So it might be a place to play, or it seems like one.
It'd certainly be a good like media producer, and to see what relationships kind of come out of it, or what relationships are more defined.
Mm-hmm.
But is that something like we settle in advance? Like what metadata are we going to capture as part of this? Because I think in a way that was the last thing that we did, was trying to figure out kind of what common metadata. We like wrote a bunch of things, and then we did a structural analysis of all this metadata, and it's okay. We're kind of realizing all of this does have some kind of similar structure to it, but like what's coming out of it?
Yeah.
Where is the similarity?
I guess one thing that we, in our analysis, we were looking at a pretty like surface post level, in the sense that we were looking at each post as almost a block of its own, but not really going one level deeper into the content. You know, like mine would have been mostly series of paragraphs, but then there was like the YouTube video that would have been like a block embed, I guess, from the external internet, which is a whole other like set of worms. But I do have this feeling that if we did another metadata analysis, but more on like the individual components of these posts, I wonder if we would almost like come up with an even closer, more consistent set of like analyses, because then we're looking at like markdown almost, instead of the higher level order thing that like my post was a post with text with geospatial. Like we're kind of like saying, let's just go one level deeper there, which feels like less combinatorial in some sense.
So you're saying do another exercise and produce like with a more constrained.
Not like really. I'm not even sure that we would need to do the exercise. My feeling is that if we did the exercise, our outcomes would look more similar to each other than what we had the first time. Because the first time it was like, I guess we were looking at like the very, very highest level, whereas if we went like a level deeper and tried to split each other's posts into like even smaller sections, what we would end up is paragraphs, images, links, like, yeah. And I think the similarities in terms of arrangement there would be a lot more consistent. And so like, I'm not sure we should do like an exercise. I'm just kind of saying that frame of it for me feels a little more like grokkable, just going one level deeper and just trying to move away from finding a consistency between the highest order and just like going one level deeper and just saying, these are just streams of blocks really. And what are those blocks and how do they, what's the glue between them?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think we're just finding an on-ramp for that exact thing. Yes, that's like, so we can sort of role play a block, like I'm a block and I'm next to you, and then here's what I contain. And like, if, you know, how we stick together, right? Like the idea that like, given any block, you can have like, what is the minimum requirement for a block to exist, right? Like, does it require a bit of text? And then what are other coordinating, like sort of, and then, because the ideal form of a block, I think, is there's like some very simplistic minimum form, and then like the ability to then complexify, like upward to some upper limit before breaking and, you know, needing abstraction. So yeah, then we're talking about like, I mean, there are limiting factors in like, it can contain text, it can contain audio, like an audio is just a, you know, a pointer or something. What is the nature of that? How does the file come into the thing, right? Is it a file? Is it encoded directly? You know, does that matter? These are like the sort of more technical, it's above my pay grade, I guess, but like, and then we can just go from that, like it's, yeah, I don't, is that what you're kind of talking about, or am I?
I think so. I guess, like when I picture this in my mind, I really like kind of jump to Notion. Even though they aren't really doing like crazy multimedia blocks, there's something about like the fact that the cursor moves across the page and you see that like light outline just pop up over these individual elements, where, and they don't really do unique addressing, but like that underlying piece is yeah, it's like what I keep on trying to. In
synchronous settings where you can see the highlight, or when someone highlights something.
No, just personally, like when my mouse cursor like moves over it, like I see those little things sort of highlight and like the CSS style change, which to me makes each Notion document feel not like a document, but as an actual series of blocks. And I guess what I'm saying is like, as far as the front end side of it, like they have these rules already. Like, you know, you can put some words in a block, there can be bullet points within a block, but If you have a new line, it generally creates a table, the image.
Yep.
You know, like
Video embed, yep.
could be a place like at some point if we like go into a Notion document and kind of feel what that feels like. And I wonder if that I guess the effects and the fact that you have a context menu for each block would give us a little more like feel of what a bunch of blocks on a page feels like, because they've already like gone down that road pretty far, and you know they're obviously they're not doing anything like everything is still a document and it's like very linear, but there is at least some of the mechanics that make me treat those documents as something a little different than even our markdown posts, because our markdown posts do feel very like concrete. Like once they're formed, feels harder for me to like tear them apart. Notion that doesn't feel like that.
Okay, so yeah, like having a definitional standard for the blocks. Yep. So that they have the possibility. I mean, so are you talking about like sort of thinking about it in terms of how the surface would work in relation to these? Or
I think, yeah, with Notion, it's mainly how does it feel, not the underlying like definition of it. I think that's something we come up with ourselves. I guess like just the very, very front end experience might feel a little bit similar to Notion in my imagination, but it really doesn't answer questions about
Relational.
Yeah, exactly. Because for Notion, it's mainly this.
I wonder if it's worth thinking about those two things separately. Because with the Lego block metaphor, you've got like the little nub on top, and it kind of defines what you can do with it and where other things can go. I wonder if that like kind of constrains us a little too much in this conversation. And like a block should just be more like, you know, here's a tiny bit of content in any one of these formats, and it can be a super wide range of formats, obviously. But then I wonder if relation is more like, you know, its own set of primitives.
I think so.
Where there's like glue that's right next to it, or yeah.
I think so, because at a minimum, the blocks don't have to have relationships. I mean, like there's a relationship to who created it. Like there's we're back to the metadata thing. I mean, I guess what subset of metadata is relationship? But yeah.
I guess there's metadata inside the block, and then there's relationship from block to block, which wouldn't be person to block. So like, I think if that's the model, then who wrote it would be very cleanly within the internal metadata and not a relation to another block. I don't know. I wonder if a constraint like that keeps working further. Yeah.
I guess one other, when you said, you know, the user thing, like one other possible form in my mind is one of the relations is just pointing to a user object, a user block, right? Like is a user a block, kind of like where we have the low level Ethereum address.
Is a user a block? Okay.
Yeah, and then that relation exists on the outside of the block. So less explicit. And if I really go down that road, can every piece of metadata just be a relation?
Yeah. Well, I think it's like defined by the relationship, right? You say, okay, I have this block, now there's this other block that's pointing to it, and that's the user for this block.
Yep.
The user who created this.
Yep. Also, can you get a little closer? You're a little hard to hear sometimes.
Yeah.
Anything? Yeah, I mean, that also feels like it opens up the ability to say like, this block points to a user, or a user points to this block, and the different things that could mean, and like this block is in between two users. Like it sort of lets you structure the metadata around the content in whatever form feels most natural. But like this feels like another kind of way to look at it versus Shahruz, where you're just saying like, let's draw a boundary between what's defined inside and outside. Would, you know, like just getting a line somewhere would let, I think, the things around it start stacking better, because it's kind of like, you know, where the boundaries are.
Yeah, I wonder if, I mean, the process is just like figuring out some versions of constraints for definitions, and then just kind of like trying out use cases and seeing if the math checks out until it doesn't, and then switching to a different one or fixing it or changing it.
Yeah.
Well, it makes me think like, then what are our specific use cases? I mean, one that immediately pops to my head is at least like there's some semblance of like Rome usage within the group, but can we build a decentralized collaborative version of Rome? Like would that, and one that also has like some level of like publishing ability from it. And maybe that's like more the Notion kind of compose thing where you can say you're writing all this stuff in Rome and pull these like blocks into something that's more documented, and that gets published. Like is that one front end that we're potentially looking at, or what are the other front ends that we can think about to actually start figuring out what the underlying system looks like to get to there?
Yeah, it'd be good if there's something that we want to be doing, and then we build it for ourselves, you know? So like if we are, so one of this is, again, the games come back in, and I don't know if it adds too much complexity to this. It could be just we need to get the things working together, and it's enough to just, so one of the places I was going with this, and it may be more narrative or something, like is the idea of just like creating interfaces, like, you know, like, so so far we have the Telegram bot that you made, right? That like, you put input and it goes through a series of stuff, and then it outputs into a surface on the internet, right? In the repo. And then we talked about, John was talking about, like Kristen is doing all these like note-taking sessions in Apple Notes, and there's no way to export these things or whatever, but writing a sort of a macro, or however you want to look at it, to screen cap the things, compose them, and then push them to the server, right? Like these are all funnels or pipes into the thing that give us like composable block types or whatever. And like, are there some primitives there that we can build just to continue to pipe stuff into the repo for the fun of doing it? Like, because it's you know, like trying to create little like media extensions into the repo, and then that gives us a playground to see if there is consistency between these blocks, because then that's an enacted, like I want to be making posts, and right now you're talking about how they're too rigid, right? So like, how do we de-rigidify these things because we're using it, and we're trying to, you know, so maybe that's a more pragmatic way of looking at this. It's not building Rome.
Yeah, that could be a little bit high overhead.
So yeah, like, are there other types, maybe that's a place, like, are there other types of like simple content pipes because I had this instinct, like over the week when I had time to poke around in the repo, like I'm starting to feel the design thing where I'm like, oh, these are of a type, and I want to stick them together into a type of navigation, like the author page, like you added the consumption, like blocks, basically. Those like clearly stick together. You would consume those in a, like if I were a viewer, I would look at them in a certain type of way. Then there are posts that we're all making that they're effectively blog posts right now, but they're just sort of a general concept of post type. And then, you know, I have my doodles, which are like, you know, would be correct, like directly connected to concepts or whatever. It's another type of post, or, you know, and then everybody else has their sort of different, is there a consistent primitives in those potentially that, like, this is, you know, like Tumblr, for instance, you got an image post, you got a text post, you got a whatever. We're doing a more like elaborate collaborative version of this kind of thing. Maybe that's some steering here, I don't know.
No, my feeling is yeah, the things that have ended up in the repo so far are there for a reason, and presumably like look like things will be pushing into there in the future. So trying to like corral that into some set of things feels, you know, like a pretty good place to start, because we're not trying to encapsulate the entire internet. It's just like what we've generated so far, and sort of maybe just an extra 20% for things that we just like want to ambitiously say, let's throw it in as well. But we're already covering a lot of these cases. Yeah, it's like a text post, a picture of a thing offline, embedded like external resource. Yeah, we've already generated a lot of these. we could try to like drop all of our posts into a spreadsheet and just like move them around into like piles and see kind of what emerges, or like, in other words, try to, look at each thing kind of atomically, or maybe just do some like high level analysis, like a very, very like rough analysis on each file in the repo. What, like, ignoring folders, ignoring, the contents of each file. But we'd still need to define a lot of that stuff ourselves, like, because we're not following any consistent naming or anything.
Yeah, I think more thinking about this in terms of like building little tools for each other's processes, right? Like the game is like, so you and Kristen effectively did this. Like Kristen had a process that she is doing because it's fun to do, right? It grew out of like a sort of natural inclination to like take notes in a style, and then the next inclination is share it with the repo, right? Share it with the group. And you're like, oh, I can make that. One, I would like to do that myself. So there's an intrinsic, will to build, which is nice. And then two, like it's a favor for Kristen. And three, you can open it up to the group as and that thing may be in a format that we don't have a standard yet, but there is a build process there that gives you a surface to figure out standard, right? You have to think about it. You're constrained to that. So I don't know if that's that's how I took what you were saying, Shahruz. Like, and we can maybe coordinate higher up than that, like, keep within these kinds of constraints for this cycle, I don't know how you design those constraints though, but yeah. And if there is another one, like say for instance, we want the ability to like create a web form that allows you to post directly to the thing, right? And everybody could use that web form. And then this is it's tooling now that we've got that gives us another like surface. It's an activated small project to do another round of thinking on the thing. Rather than going back and doing analysis on the unstructured stuff that we did, like creating new pipes as a way to move forward and have more things come into and we can then sort of coordinate games around the usage of these things potentially. That's a suggestion, I don't know.
So like do a game with, at the outset, defining which primitive types we're going to be using.
I mean, so where are you in that process? I just laid out a bunch of stuff. So how do you mean?
We're going to do a game where we're posting only text, image, links, YouTube embeds, or something like that. I'm not following where you're going, Dave.
I'm sort of talking about like finding a way to figure this out through building. Like,
yeah. So if I'm kind of like picking this up, the game might say we can only use these blocks, or I think the game could also say, or we can build a new pipeline for new types of blocks, but they're not just created like ad hoc markdown files. We want to keep a more consistent way of like getting them in. So I guess maybe the game would have like slack time for building these like extra sort of funnels in, but I guess anything that goes in needs to have some way of following that cycle again.
Yeah, so if I'm picking up on what John's saying, so we could have like one API endpoint that has one kind of specific standard that's like our tiniest block possible with like the smallest definition. And then any pipes that we build, any tooling that we build, like goes through that. So everything's kind of like being structured properly so that it can then be analyzed kind of more in a more standardized way. Whereas right now, all the markdown files just give way too much variance within each thing. They don't break down to that block level easily. Is that kind of what we're saying, or?
I think so. I mean, Kristen's
maybe
was around how does that relate to a game definition, I think. which, like, I guess part of the game could be like build a new funnel, and then part of the game can be send things through that funnel.
Or it's just whatever you post has to conform to the structure that works with the API. So it doesn't matter what it is as long as it.
However you get it in there, it conforms.
Yeah, there's the minimum conformment that ties these things together, as there is a marker or a set of markers, however these are originated, to say that these are posts, these are blocks within the system. Okay, now we have that, it's a handshake, like it's a shared language. Yeah, so then how do you mediate like how that works, right? So the endpoint or I mean, we can continue to manually do these, like where we make posts and we have like an agreement, which is, you know, we're dancing around how to create the agreement of this form, right? And I'm thinking that probably without sitting down and creating something that runs you into the problem of finding what you need to know about the agreement, we have to build this. We have to build something, because otherwise we're probably gonna get stuck here trying to virtualize this.
Yeah.
Where if you just sit down and you're like, all right, everybody needs to put a thing down. What's the thing that's gonna tie them all together, and how are we gonna tie it together? Like, okay, then if we share that problem, like, and then we're in the build space somehow. So then it's constraints on how you get to like birth this thing, right? So yeah.
Schemas, is that what we're talking about, I guess?
Probably, I don't know.
Writing a basic schema, does that sound right? Like something is like a definition of a post is a title field, a content field, a type field, or yeah.
User, yeah.
So that's what I started doing in the last exercise. Like that's what I guess it's a schema, or an attempt at one, like the start of like a proposal for one. It's probably mostly wrong, but like that was the direction I was going in. Like given this template, I could barf out all kinds of stuff. And then I had some prepositional like language around the things, like, you know, like certain things, like the structure of, and that may have been too many steps ahead. Like, you know, if there can be like in a block, you know, or no, in a post, I guess, it has multiple composed times and these kinds of things or whatever. Anyways, that doesn't matter. I'm getting too into that thing. Yeah, so an agreed upon schema. And then like, what is the mechanism for agreeing upon a schema? And I think
this phone call, is that the mechanism?
Sure, I guess. We've agreed that we need one. And that's, I think, what we've heard about. And yeah, so this
What's
is
good is they're best simple too. Like the more you complicate them, the worse off you are. So
yes.
Title.
I mean, basically. So what we just worked out here is like, all right, we've been talking about the thing that we need to do. And Shahruz is like, it's called this. So now we can all agree that we're talking about making a schema. At least we know that we just defined it by enacting it. So hopefully that, I think that's my take on what happened. But
I mean, it sounds like it's getting something that is both human understandable and somewhat machine understandable, which seems like progress in a good way to be able to touch both of those things at once in this step.
Okay.
DJ, you said title?
I said title, date, content. That was the schema that I had, is title, date, and content. I personally, I don't even like title. I would like mostly because my bot doesn't like titles. So I don't like titles because of it. If I'm just throwing a URL at it, I'm like, well, that's a block, and I'm going to respond to that block, but I haven't figured out the title for it yet.
Yeah.
And really, I just need a better way of like consuming this on the front end to give it the title, and then that actually, like, the title is an important piece of metadata to link it into all of it. without a title, it's just like unlinked content.
Yeah.
Does it become hard to browse content without a title? Like should something be automatically ingested if you like pop the URL in without a title? Like should a system go and take the title of that page that you've linked?
Yeah, actually,
so that it becomes
should for sure.
Yeah, I think that's at some point, there's going to be this line of like, is that information stored on the block, or is the system that's displaying the block like intelligent enough to just do that and cache it somehow? But yeah, when I like look at URLs, I'd much rather look at like anything pulled from the site in a favicon rather than yeah, just like the raw URL data. That is a bit, technically speaking though, like we did a bit of this extraction stuff, and it does become like a bit of the long tail of like complexity, but at some point I think it is like very necessary to add that additional context.
Yeah, especially for a view.
Yeah.
On the unnamed post, unnamed post. Yeah, just me.
kind of hard to hear. I don't know if it's just me.
Yeah,
that
couldn't
one,
hear.
That one was a bit muddy.
It's just without a name, it basically goes, you can't figure anything out. It's just unnamed, unnamed, unnamed.
Yeah, that's the other side. Yeah, like even on CJ's profile, I think is where it popped on. Yeah, it's like unnamed. At that point, it would be a little more helpful to see the URL or just like a link from domain or something like extremely, extremely simple, rather than your like classic untitled fill-in.
Yeah. So how I've worked with this in the past, like when we were doing a lot of composing sites and blocks and this kind of stuff, and storing like ridiculous page designs and all this. Jason, my partner, would just give me sort of objects that all of the variables were exposed for the like what was internal to the entity effectively, and I could lay them out in forms that were more or less legible, right? And in the case that like there, was headless because we didn't have a requirement for something like a title, then you could have like a default, call it untitled, right? And then put that in italicized or something. And that means that, right, there are lots of patterns to sort of work this way. So yeah, as long as the stuff is exposed, like you can build whatever front end on top of it. It's about the permeability, or how like, and then how the the relationships here, the primitives that we were talking about, this sort of comes up because like the metadata, like, okay, so the metadata for a block, right? Like being able to like, yeah, where am I going with this? I lost it. Never mind. Yes. Like, so is the debate here whether or not like title is required? I mean, is that what we're playing with? Or
I feel like we can. I'm not very like, I don't care either way.
Yeah.
Personally, so
To me, it feels. Sorry, go ahead. Okay. To me, it feels a little more like there's a fork in the road where either we say title is a field and an extra field, or it's like title is not a field and there's only two like things in the schema and that's it, right? It's like kind of feels like title is really just a placeholder for like many other things. Yeah. Is the minimum the correct thing here, where we just say literally content and time the content was added and that's it, and everything else that will come after the fact somehow, like through a schema extension rather than like this initial agreed upon consortium.
Yeah, I mean, like this, I don't have anything to make this decision. Sure. I mean, it makes sense.
I've got two others that might be as like foundational as title or date. It's like block creator or author, but I think author is maybe a little bit too specific of a meaning. So like block creator, I think maybe more generic, just creator. And then type might be one, because like in content, if you're just popping in a URL, should the thing parsing it know that it's supposed to be rendered as like an embed or a link? So type just as like a way of, or type layout, I don't know what to call it, but one of those two, something like that. Yeah, those can basically give instructions for how to interpret the content.
The type one scares me a little bit because, well, I guess it scares me if we want to agree on the set of types that can fit in the schema, because that kind of just takes us back to the same question, just one order like of complexity higher.
Right.
Versus it's a
Yep.
field and everybody can fill it with whatever they want, and just make sure that your parser knows how to understand it, and or the parser that you put out into the world knows how to understand, like kind of like leaving it as part of the user's domain to, or whoever's working with this. So I guess, yeah, my question is, are you imagining more of like an open-ended type field or like a set of types? At least initially.
Somewhere in between, maybe like something that, starts off with a predefined set but has extensibility somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we discover that there's something else that we should have thought of earlier, or some user behavior emerges where it's like, oh well, that's a cool way of doing something, we should add a type for that. I don't know. I think somewhere in between might make sense, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's a handful of primitives that like can operationalize the thing pretty quickly for most people, and then it's extendable. Like, and then if those extensions, like say if you had an open environment and people are building on this thing, they'll find those new types, and then they're shareable. They work across the system. I don't know that there's no governing body saying, these are the accepted, but there may be like a set of standards like that to make certain like viewports interoperational, right? That's a bigger, but for now we just need some stuff that's like, here's our basic components, like, and if you have these things, you can play these games kind of thing. This is back to the media Legos. So these are the media Legos. And our basic little primitives or little widgets. So yeah, I don't know, like you definitely have a text one, you definitely have an audio one, you definitely have a video one, right? Or they could, yeah. I don't know if there's a different way to look at that, right? Like if the blocks are defined by the media object, or if it's just a URL or something. And then like, yeah, I don't know, because this is down to like the viewport or whatever. If we're spitting out that this is a video, you always know that this is video, and yeah. So anyways, this is. Yeah.
And yeah, video would come with its own set of internal complexities, because it's like, are you uploading an MP4? Are you linking to an MP4? Is it a link to a YouTube thing or a Vimeo thing? What level of things should that video type support? Yeah, interesting.
I mean, this is where like having little standards like this that get you up and running quickly. We can just come up with one, and then if somebody needed to do like a highly extensible super system, that's got all these inputs and outputs, you can build that thing. That's fine. We're just giving you the scaffolding to do that with like, some small set that you can cobble together pretty quickly, a media system that's like taking in videos that are generally well, uploaded or whatever. That would be the ideal. That could work, right?
Yeah, I mean, date creator content type does not feel like a bad place to start.
Yeah.
I don't know. Someone make a We can vote. I don't care.
I think headless is fine.
Headless is fine. Awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess someday a block type will be title for X block, you know, and like then it just there we go.
So the one thing here that like I'm curious about is context, like rather than title, which can be basically the same thing, but like just as a narrative structure to think about this, like because if these things are relatable, like what is the minimum relatable like connector? I'm back to the Lego thing, I guess here. So is there something that makes them inherently relatable, like across blocks? Is there one like piece of the schema that does that, or am I overthinking this?
Well, and immediately when you said a context field instead of a title field, I'm almost imagining like a magical design fiction field where we literally like describe how this piece of information relates to the other pieces of information in the system. And it has absolutely no bearing on like technicalities. And it's like purely this is about that, or this is in relation to this, or this is like whatever. But human parsable for now, but like, yeah, as a way to get a little closer to something that tells us the scope of things that we should be worried about on the technical side. Is that kind of what you mean?
Like, it's effectively, I mean, the simplest version of that is a field that like the intention that you have when you're making these things is like, well, for now it's a manual, fill it out. What is the context in which you're creating this thing? Or that you wish to people to know to think about this thing, right? And the ideal longer term version of this is a lot of computer mediated stuff mixed with like stuff that is being pulled in from the game environment and whatever else. But this is it's a toehold for the relational aspect. It's a symbolic field, right?
Makes a lot of sense.
I like your description a lot of the design fiction. It just sounded like computer magic to me, and it gets me very excited.
Computers can be magic, I believe.
Good.
We just have to imbue some magic into them.
Honestly, I mean, this is, it's the same thing as the film thing. Film is worth something now. Okay. And then here.
You just make something up and then you put people in that situation, they have to play along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why not? Yeah. This one is just got a lot of steps to get to the compelling. I think we're getting foundation in here though. It's good. Context is good. Yeah.
So we're at date, content, type, creator, and context. Yep. Where date automatic, creator automatic, type usually, if you know what content you're putting in, you'll have a sense of what type you're going to put in. It should map to something. Yeah. Content's very free form, and context for now is free form, but may not always be. Is that right?
Yeah.
Get more structured.
Yeah, and it may even break out into like a schema for relationships or something. Like
I'm imagining that
you were talking about. Yeah. So it's just a holding.
Yep. And I guess type, if nothing else, then it like can default down to like binary text, really. You know,
right.
Just, I mean, the thing that we are probably putting in, if it's going to live in Markdown, it's probably some sort of like series of characters. But I guess what like the default base would be like text post or something like that.
Yeah.
Text blob.
So is all of this going to be embedded in like front matter of a markdown file before, like, where is this going to go on the repo? Like, if now that we have this schema, how is this, like, where is this going next? Like, say we had that magical API endpoint where now you send it this schema, like, where is it going next?
Can you explain the endpoint stuff, sort of?
I guess, like, I was just imagining, like, you have all this information. Mm-hmm. Now you send whatever file with this information, like you send content plus everything else to this link. Maybe it's through an app, maybe it's through manually doing it on a website, you know, wherever. Where's that going in the repo? Does it go in the repo? Does it have a specific folder? Does it matter?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter to them. It's fine. Like, it just goes into a giant folder.
Yeah, I mean the feeling when I'm imagining creating content like this, the where of the file begins to matter a lot less, at least to me, because I'm like, as long as I can like search by one of these fields,
Right.
I'll have a much higher degree of confidence that I can find to it, not only find it, but like link to it, which I think is the more important part. So then the location definitely becomes less important. You know, something like a folder called blocks, even like, and just sends it right into there.
Because yeah, longer. I mean, the API endpoint I think was just a step in like conceptually getting to, oh, we need a schema. But I think like for now, if we are just dumping it into a blocks folder, the idea should be that with all this schema that we're defining, if everything conforms to it, a machine can come in, you know, a month from now, parse all of it, standardize it, put it into whatever database or IPFS or blockchain, wherever it's got to go. Exactly. It should just be ready to ingest at that point.
So in other words, feel free to edit VS Code files, just edit it in the way that an API would as well.
Right.
That feels grokkable.
And dump them all into the blocks folder with no folder hierarchy, just like flat.
Which is moving towards this. We were talking about this sort of movement from files to whatever a Web3 native, whatever the hell is, which is this interconnected stew of data. Like, it all makes sense. Yeah, and like, so finding a way to dump files and folders as like a crutch.
Yep.
Good. So, okay, I think that's a good sign that we're headed in the right direction. That if it works in the stew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So if we have the folder and we have the contents, what do we call the file?
Well, that goes back to the title question, right? A little bit.
Yeah.
Should it just not matter at all?
.md, 2.md, 3.md, just kind of.
Sure, yeah.
That was where my mind went initially, but then I got like thinking about people in different like time zones and on different planets, and I kind of got really, really worried. Like, even like,
I mean, is it context serving this purpose too? Like, so like back, like Shahruz was just saying that it is the same thing as the title thing, right? It is an addressing from a previous instantiation of system.
Yes, but I guess context is like, so context can be guaranteed to be visible in the file. Title is something that like there may be constraints on what a title can be, just based on the system like level. Like it can only have dashes, spaces are weird on like Unix versus Windows, and you know, you just have all of these like little constraints. Context, I think, still feels a little more like open-ended and safe to, but in some sense, yes, like a title is an alternative thing for context, but in our case, like I feel like a title that's very generalized and simple and consistent kind of feels more like something close to numbers, you know, just like it really shouldn't provide, like, in other words, using the system, I don't think the title of the file name is important. Right. And it shouldn't really be visible to the user even. I think it is as optimized for the system to understand something as possible. The one thing that comes to my mind is like Unix time. So,
right.
You know, like just it ensures a rough order, and the chance of collisions is relatively low for a really long time, and we're dealing with one time dimension so far. So,
I mean, this is an opportunity to create a new timeline, the new time.
I know, it's very exciting.
Let's start from zero now.
Yeah,
is that what you said?
Possible. Necessary or required.
Buzzard time code.
Funny.
Basically.
Yeah. So just, something to think on. I don't
So
know.
like longer term, theoretically, these would live somewhere like an IPFS or a blockchain or something where they would all be given like a random
Yep.
hash title. So yeah, the file title we should definitely be designing to throw away at some point if that's where we're headed.
Exactly. Yeah, it feels more like a placeholder that's just kind of there so that we can internally link these files without like really, not something painful and like long and complex, but just
Right.
really consistent. There is part of me that's like just a UUID for each file kind of feels nice as well, but like UUIDs are long. I mean, maybe like a 8-character UUID, but then how big is that space? Who's generating them oneself is kind of annoying versus the timestamp almost feels like a unique address. Like it kind of has all of the properties of a hash, like on IPFS, except that you don't have to generate it. Like it's just a pretty easy thing. But it feels like it migrates nicely over to a more real, like universal hash at some point.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, how are we generating these things? Like in the meantime, right? Because like I don't know.
There's like that epochtimestamp.com or something.
That's what
I think there's a website you can just go and pull the current timestamp code from.
Yep.
Cool.
And I think any API endpoint bot can just, that's one of the simplest functions. It'll just drop that in as well.
Yeah, I mean, we can agree on this and then sort of share like a quick process. This will be like cool. Yeah,
I just shared one link that has a resource for that, but could use anything.
Nice.
There it is.
Yeah, so that stuff we're aping things that are going to be computer logic, ingestible and stuff for now. It's good to feel that where that membrane is. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so the one thing about date that I kind of forgot about is format of date.
We also do like Unix plus
time zone, probably.
Yeah, whatever our little formula is, we can just whatever I think you guys are going to be
I think the Unix timestamps based on seconds or milliseconds is all UTC standardized already. So it shouldn't matter, I don't think.
True.
John, are you thinking that like maybe you want to like figure out the time zone after the fact and that wanting that to be encoded?
Yeah, I guess that was more it. Like posted at 12 a.m. local time is different from like 6 p.m. somewhere else, in the sense that I often use like platforms that don't do that, and like it makes me feel like not well when I see all the posts are like at 3 a.m. where I'm like I lose all context about when. So yeah, the time format like I think will be consistent, but displaying the when of when it happened is but it's also like not a trivial thing to solve in web-based systems either. So yeah, that's kind of where just like my initial hesitancy was. Maybe there's
I think that could maybe go inside the internal date inside the schema, because if we're going to ignore the file stamps, like or the file names,
yeah,
the main point right now is to have something consistent and clean to look at and not a chance of colliding, which would happen if we all did 1, 2, 3, 4, because we're not going to be in sync on that. But I think the date inside could solve what you're saying in terms of including the time zone.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that is where it's tricky. Yeah, like we shouldn't be deriving the date from the timestamp of the file, even if it is like epoch time, the date I guess inside. We could just do the really standard like year hyphen month date time and then T for time zone, like one of those. But those are a little annoying to type. But we can also build a little helper thing that lets you just copy and paste it out. Because it's still pretty human readable, but like nice to parse after the fact.
Some like ISO format, I forget.
Yeah, I think it's a very short-term pain. Yeah, everything we're going to build is going to sort of take care of this as a baseline. So, yeah, cool.
And then the creator field, is that a username or like the alternative being a text field, names and like pseudo identities and all of that. Like, in other words,
Ethereum address could be.
well, the Ethereum address. Yeah, yeah, that'd be great.
I mean, that's where we're headed.
Pretty simple to copy paste too.
Yeah. I mean, we can start playing with that. I mean, this is our like first
Playground.
like clear overlap with identity and like, that system. Yeah, I don't know what comes up here, and the multiple creators are definitely something in this too. Don't know how that works actually.
Multiple creators.
Yeah, is that a thing at all?
Creator.
Oh, on a single block.
Yep.
Or is
Maybe
it,
that's one of those things you can compose with relations later on.
because I think that's actually it. Yeah. What the hell?
Because should blocks be the smallest unit in that they couldn't be written by more than one person?
Mhm.
Like, does that make sense? Like or is that too restrictive? Because a paragraph could be written by two people, I guess.
Yeah, picture of a
So,
diagram. Go ahead.
That's interesting. I'm just thinking about if it matters less on the back end as it does on the front end, like how you want this thing displayed to the public, because it's more of a publishing thing. Because on the back end, like if we all created something but one person enters it, like it doesn't matter to us. It's how we want it perceived. I don't know. It changes this conversation to something outward facing, I feel like.
Yeah, it's also like, so if you bring in the credit case here, like
Yeah.
if there's some quantity of
We're introducing then an abstraction of a number of users into a group potentially, which is another user type.
Yeah, I mean, this one, so we are inherently having this thing be like there are multi-authors, multi-creators in the system. That is a normative condition of the system. But yeah, where is the line on recognizing that multi-authorship, right? So
Do you have like a shared ETH address or a shared address that you just like spawn for that thing, or that you maybe maintain long term or something?
Yeah, I don't.
That would let you add and remove folks, but then I don't know if you want that retroactively changing the content of that post or posts from the past. I guess, yeah, it's a matter of whether that should be static, as in it's locked in at the time of the post and then can be edited by the people who initially did it, or if it's dynamic in the sense that if like, is this a publishing group where everybody who is in that publishing group always gets, their byline pulled in to the author field? Could see it going either way, really.
Like
both would be nice.
This is like an accounting problem.
Yeah.
Because now that you have like resource attached to it,
There's in between, well, kind of to what Kristen was saying, like almost like a scribe author role where you explicitly want to say like, I am simply moving content for somebody else. Like, I may be the one that clicked the keyboard and enter and stuff, but like, this is somebody else's work. What is author then? And that's why we're kind of not calling it author. I mean, I think creator of the block makes more sense in that case, like the person who literally like did the thing. So then maybe creator shouldn't be even used for attribution and credit. Maybe it like
it is a different thing.
Yeah.
Because it does. What was that?
That could be metadata later or something.
Yeah. Well, it's not just front end. Now that I'm like what Dave was saying, like with credit, it's more governance structure too.
Yeah.
Because if multiple people are working on something and there is some currency, if it's tokenized in some way, you need to distribute that, and it would depend on who is working on it.
Yeah.
But
mean-
again, like, and in that instance, it's not necessary that the public knows everybody who did everything. This
True.
is where there's abstractions of groups some here. It's like, I don't know, it's types of users. I think, yeah, there's something in there.
Yeah,
A creator is different than author or whatever you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone creates it, but then owner, like, I don't like that either. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's closer to the
Yeah.
the feel. Consciousness minor.
Are we going to run into this problem in our own post for a while?
Yeah, I think for now,
We're all doing single author stuff for now, I think.
maybe we just run
Sure.
with it.
Yeah, there is one other. I mean,
shared canvases are the first instantiation,
Yeah.
and these videos.
Right.
We're all participating in them, providing, you know, some whatever the hell we're doing. And so like this is I think this is going to pop up a lot. Having some mechanism for, yeah, go ahead.
what if this is in some sense handled by the context field for now?
Yeah, I think that it is lumped where it's the relationship primitives, it's all of this.
Is basically that you can basically like context can say this video was between such and such and such. The creator of the block then just becomes the person who like uploaded the file or whatever. But the context, because even just saying this video is of or by these 5 people is context in and of itself, like in some sense, like that implies that it relates to such and such, and it relates all these people together. Like I feel like it is almost the most native version of context.
Sure.
So it kind of fits there. And I mean, I guess at some point we see patterns and then we try to like pull those out into those more interesting, like layered address group things. But until then, it's just like.
Yeah. I mean, so, but the thing that's popping up here is that like you have a Zoom-like interface where everybody signs in with their address and their time code, and it's all marked up, and then like, you know, the feed coming through, who's talking, and obviously you get all this context, and then that is marked up in the file or related primitive or something like this, and it's all encoded. And then each person, obviously that's way down the line, but there is some way of like checking in to a shared media, or in the case that you're all drawing together on a surface, there is some like coordinated, you are signed in with that identity, and it is associating you to the output of the artifact output. I don't know how the blocks work in that case, but yeah. Yeah, so it's back into the context bucket. I mean, we're going to start filling up the context bucket, and you're going to get, it's just a swamp. So
everything will evolve out of the swamp.
We get some weeds in there.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. Everything else will be organized though. It's we've just like figured out the closet to like dump everything into.
Yeah.
Push all the stuff you don't know what the hell to do with.
Yeah.
Just don't look in that closet. It's fine.
Giant mess, but it's fine.
Throw things into the closet in this particular way.
Yeah. Slowly we'll add like hangers and stuff.
Yeah.
Initially, it's just a pile on the floor.
Exactly.
Just get a Roomba that does everything for you.
Yeah.
Build.
You need some NLP on it, fine.
Yeah. Okay. Where are we down to? Content?
Content.
We've already go through that. Whatever.
That was free form.
Yep.
Yeah.
type is type still kind of ambiguous, or no? Is it just going to be like mostly like concrete, like pretty agreed upon types to begin with, and then as we kind of go, just like proposing new types to each other, kind of just open communication, like, hey, this type is representing like this kind of thing, to just account for everything? Or how is that going to go?
I think that's fine. Like, yeah, I mean, we don't have, I mean, it's image and there, I don't know, like if the types are associated with media type, or if there's something more conceptual here. Yeah, what is the nature of that? Are we just?
I mean, each type would come with some set of instructions or some standard for how the content should be rendered, right? Or interpreted. I guess interpreted and rendered. So if the type was video and the content was then like an MP4 URL, the whatever it's displaying it should know not to spit out that MP4 URL as text or a link, but rather as a video embed.
Yeah.
Or the same thing with audio. So to me, type, I think, is like it's a standard around how something should be interpreted and rendered, and then we could start off with the core ones and then grow them over time, or even establish like, here's the rules for inventing your own if you want to extend it.
Forgot we went over that. Yep. Got it. Cool.
I guess how further, or how far into this do we need to go? But like, we've had a couple of different styles of embedding images so essentially putting things in assets, naming things in assets, and I guess, yeah, it's really like where they're put and how they're named. And to me, it feels like it should pretty much be a style that kind of follows this. So in other words, like it almost becomes that assets is just a second closet that has like things pointing to it. But I don't know, like, is there some value in just putting all the things in in essentially blocks as well, like all of the things, so that the block subdirectory is in some sense self-contained, so that like anything that is like timecode.md, all of the dependencies for that are sort of in the same directory versus another directory. Like that part to me, it means I'm kind of like, I'm not sure I can see pros and cons.
Head towards media storage, right? Because like you're gonna have to separate those out because the media is gonna get too enormous. So like what popped to mind is sort of like having I don't know how IPFS and all this stuff works, but like a thing where you can do the drop something and then get back a URL in a standard that is future composable or whatever, and it's being stored, and you can dump that into your post. And then whatever that future storage system, like that. So we're talking about like how do you reference the files, and then what are all that stuff, right? We, in the meantime, don't, is there something that we can mimic like that and then keep it all in one directory? Sure. And then just move it to where it needs to go later. I don't think about that as much.
Yeah, I mean, I like the analogy to IPFS. I mean, the assets folder is basically IPFS for us right now. It's just very like rudimentary.
Place. It's fine.
And the little upload widget does, that feels really, nice, because like the widget could literally understand what's being uploaded and just like give you the markdown format that is like best suited for that type. And like it can, distinguish between a picture and a video, and just really like take care of all of that in the back end, which like sounds awesome. So I guess, if all things go into assets, should they just be named like something very similar to the file name, like this sort of timestamp based name hyphen maybe something, or even because like there's sometimes like a single post might have like 6-10 like files. Should there be some high level association between those that, you know, these are all like at the file system level, or does it really not matter at all? And like all associations between these files are defined from within posts and from within these blocks.
I think from within the post, because that also means that any externally hosted content can follow the same rules.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the assets directory, if the contents of that would also be going on to an IPFS like thing, they would lose that like file name level metadata if there's anything in there. And then the chances of a file name collision seem lower in the assets folder too for now.
Yeah. So I guess timestamp dot whatever extension the file is, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Fine by me. You reference IPFS stuff like through hashes or something? I don't know how any of that works. Yeah.
Basically, for every file, you get a specific like 40 character, I think, hash back. So just like 40 characters, it always starts with like QM or QW or something. And then just like a whole bunch of garbage, but it's always unique and it's always going to be, you know, the same file that you input, you're always going to get the same hash back.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. All of this like lack of file stuff is starting to stick together finally. Yeah.
Well, lack of files.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're just mimicking the time between here. Okay. Assets folder. What else?
It's a lot of bases covered.
How is this actually getting like published to the site? Is it all just gonna like go into a markdown file? Like, is everything within the blocks a markdown file, or can it be any file? Because it seems like now we have this distinction between assets. So it's not like you're gonna drop a PNG into the blocks folder. Blocks must be something, or is it JSON and we just say content is anything? I mean,
either works. I mean, I feel like Markdown with front matter would probably be easier to write just because it's what we've already been doing. But JSON is probably what something would get translated to ultimately, just to standardize it as much as possible. But probably harder to write for now, because then all of a sudden your editor's, you know, dealing with indentation and stuff based on JSON.
Yeah, and even probably base level publishing to the website gets a little bit harder because now you're writing in JSON, and then we have to write like a thing to translate the JSON to Markdown for as well.
So are we talking about
Markdown
like
with front matter,
the Markdown with front matter for each block?
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay.
So the front matter would contain date, creator, context as just like a text field, type, and then everything below the front matter would just be interpreted as the content field.
Okay, so like putting together posts now manually requires like sticking together all of these MD files effectively, right? Is that
if you're to
like making a post?
If you were to make relationships between them,
yeah, like I'm just thinking pragmatically, like how we're gonna like actually compose things now.
Depends on if you're composing them at the paragraph level or still at the markdown level.
Yeah.
Right.
So like a multi-paragraph block.
This is going to be where it gets challenging.
Yeah, we're starting to get into territory here where if we're defining the blocks at the MD level, trying to make more complex. This is the growth into a post and like how we manage it.
Does 11D support like a transclusion kind of thing? Like, could we link to other blocks and have your post block type basically just be, you know, some kind of syntax around like, here's all the other Unix timestamps that I want to import, you know, as blocks?
Really what I'm wondering too. Yeah, like, is there a simple, not too painful way to define a markdown file that says, I am the content of this range of blocks?
Mm.
And if the answer to that is there's a really nice like low pain way in 11T to do that, then it feels like we can kind of go with that.
You're saying like what I heard Shahruz say is there a way to stick them together? And what you're saying is there a way to parse them down? Maybe it like John, like do you compose it all in one document and then say like break this into blocks? Or
so I was taking the route Shahruz took as well. Yeah, I was basically, I mean, it's kind of like mirrored, but in some sense I'm saying, yeah, we create a bunch of these markdown files and then a file that has instructions for how to assemble them. And that gets us a post.
secondary, got it, okay.
But your approach here is like you create the full media and then out comes a bunch of components that know how they were created. Also makes just as much sense. And like, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I mean, if there's I mean, you can do all these things, like how you get blocks, so part of this is like the experiments with the pipes now, like figuring out how we're going to get, so each one of these experiments to like upload a type or a format or a whatever can give us the sort of constraint to do either of those cases or whichever makes sense. Because going to build a complex post manually, like having to effectively build it like you're building a web page, it's getting into molasses territory here. So yeah. Plus doing all that input. I mean, we're going to have to put this behind a form or something soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
API backend, make a form.
Yeah, I mean, this is where in Ponder we had the like chat interface that like spit out blocks.
Yeah.
That was that sort of like text field or whatever, and input below, and then blah blah blah. Hit enter. There's your block, right?
Block producers.
Yeah, basically. I just jumped ahead past all of this.
Yeah, because I mean, you can't do that in markdown files, can you? Or could you create a markdown?
Well, I mean, you could do anything if you set your mind to it. But
I mean, yeah, I think it kind of depends. Like effectively in the bot, you could do this. Like you start writing, that's your very first block, and then like that could be more blocks, and that accepts markdown as input. That would be one way to hijack it to kind of allow for that.
What did you say the boundary character was, or the like in between specification?
Yeah, that's where it would be, is like every enter would be kind of like, if you physically send it in Telegram, would really be the boundary. It wouldn't be the markdown itself. So that'd be one possible way to kind of hijack it, but then it's on the front end actually kind of defining those relationships between each other. That would be one way to compose a post, but to define it from multiple blocks that are going like that and knowing that they have a relationship between them. Like, is that something that we need to include in the schema, is like, this is pointing to something else, or does it have an ordering, or is that some higher level concept that we haven't gotten quite to yet?
Maybe we're back in context bucket here.
Could be context.
I mean,
this almost feels more like implied context. Like if a document is a bunch of new lines and paragraph elements, and there's an image, and after the first two paragraphs, it basically says, read this as a series of blocks as a document, because it could have been entered that way, or it could have been written as one, but like the end result is we want each of those like pieces to be addressable uniquely at some point, and their arrangement is already sort of like defined relative to each other. But I guess that's just like the most simplest case, like a document, a post.
That would mean, so like if you're trying to reference it in some kind of relation to something else, that you'd have to do it with that entire block, like the entire post, as opposed to, you know, one specific paragraph or one specific image that might be in it, which kind of gets back to like, should the blocks be more restrictive as a default? So like, should they have a limit that if you have an image that you don't get to put paragraphs of text above or below it, or vice versa?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm wondering if pure input can still be markdown files like this, and then the system that translates markdown files to JSON blocks can just do that automatically and give paragraphs like a unique address. But in order to not like overwhelm us with the composition of that and the definition of it right now, like we're sort of imagining that that system can work. But that does mean that we don't have specificity right now, and you can't say I'm like referencing this specific paragraph. So yeah, the flip side of that is a harder restriction now that ensures every block is like its own unique thing.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like just the, I mean, and I may be jumping ahead here. It's like kind of follow that, but not fully. The like sort of, now I'm just thinking about composing these damn things and what the like display is. And like, you know, all of the various types, but the specific type that you have like, you know, a publishing canvas effectively, like in a document kind of form, like the thing that most people are familiar with in a, you know, Web 2 sense, like you've got a sort of, there's a bunch of different versions of this, but like just composing one of these things in like say Bear or whatever it is, right? And then you're just typing into a markdown editor, and like there is a smoothness to this interaction type, right, that most people can figure out, and then they are coming out in blocks on the other side of like the input is coming out as blocks. Like I don't know why I'm bringing that up, but that's just what I'm thinking of.
No, yeah, I mean, like, what are we gonna do on like Thursday night, right? Like, I want to produce a post. Like, how does that process work? I think that's I mean, a pretty relevant sort of question.
Yeah, and so maybe that like clearly creating something that is that smooth is a few steps away or many steps away, right? So what is the like, or do we all have particular processes that we want to create a sort of, is there like a pipeline, like a dump or whatever, that we can take our particular interfaces and then get them into a format and then barf them into, you know, you drop your file here and then something is happening process wise to work out the blocks.
Right.
Is there something simple we can write there? Well, you can write, because I can't write it.
Seems simple enough.
Yeah, that way then we're maintaining standard at some, like we're doing some computing, but nothing too overtly complex. We're doing something that the computer can do well with dates and coordinating, and then like maybe iterating the standard for context and whatever else, so that the human intervention stops at a membrane potentially. Membrane, what is maybe a first initial project to create the computer interface, right? That's what I was just filling it in too much. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would probably build is a way to take a Roam page and treat each one of my bullet points as their own blocks and just output like a series of these markdown files, and just like really like one directional, like it makes sense. And the view I see is still like a Roam document, and just in fact I just put it in document view and I don't even see the bullet points. What comes out the other end is, yes, a series of markdown files. The part about, I guess, like that makes a lot of sense to me. Like in fact, and it's pretty, you know, relatively straightforward to build this sort of thing for any, like, I think editor that has like either ability to run JavaScript or some standard output format. The only thing there that like I start to get a little lost in is how to edit that file after the fact. because now it's like my actual file is like a bunch of different things. And if I rerun that export, it's going to like write out a bunch of new blocks that now have new IDs, but to translate and to transmap like that, now that my editor needs to understand state and somehow maybe these blocks understand who, but like that's getting into like crazy territory. So that process of like keeping the contents of the repo combined enough to where like editing is still possible without really a lot of hair pulling.
I think we found our new friction. Editing. Yeah.
Ever. You write once and just.
Put that into the context for now, but I think like a parent field or like a previous version field that just links back to the previous thing could work that, and then you'd have a chain of like links of like this was the previous iteration of this that you could just keep stepping back.
Very useful because then you can very easily identify the previous thing as opposed to trying to find a timestamp.
Say the first half of that again.
At least like what Shahruz, at least what I was getting is like you kind of have like a field that's like previous. It's like you're kind of forming like potentially a doubly linked list or maybe just backwards, like more like blockchain like. And now you're saying, okay, well, one problem is finding that last piece of content. So one way to do that is via a hash. So when before you start editing, you know the previous hash. Yep. So then when you complete the next one, you have your new hash and you just say, oh, the previous hash was this guy. So then it can form that like kind of parent-child relationship or the history or lineage or whatever.
It's like a trail of breadcrumbs.
Yeah. That's what visual I got.
Yeah. I
mean, it doesn't make sense for us to even hash our entire like schema plus content and use that as a file name, and then it'll kind of create these lineages.
That's nice. The one thing there is like, given our posts or series of blocks, and an edit might increase or decrease the number of blocks, does the backwards pointer have a range associated with it as well, or a length that basically says the thing I'm pointing to used to be 7 blocks starting at, and the new one might be just 1 block because you added, you just did Command A and replaced it with like one sentence.
I think there might be a notion of like a block ID, which is what our Unix timestamps are kind of functioning as right now, that we can use as references. And that if we're expecting them to be unique, we don't necessarily need to map out like 5 ahead or 6 ahead. We can just reference like specific block IDs, which are just the Unix timestamp file names that we're using temporarily.
No, I get that for sure. I guess I'm saying like when I have a new collection of blocks that's replacing an old collection, do I specify each one in that collection?
I think that's what I was picturing, but yeah.
Okay.
What's the other interpretation of that?
I mean, I guess it has to be that because everybody's in different orders. Like, I'm not the only one producing blocks, so I can't really, I guess I didn't realize that I can't point to one of my old blocks and say, this block and the next 5 are part of, some content, because it's going to be other people. So you have to, so the lineage is basically saying this block and in some sense, the blocks related to it are replacing a set of other blocks and point to each one individually.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
One thing I'm not clear on, like this is kind of diverging, but I think I'm not clear on this because I'm not sure how these like block posts are getting combined. Like, I think we were kind of just like hand waving this and saying, like, I'm not sure how the post is actually arriving. Yeah, I get how the file arrives on the site, but I'm not getting how a collection of blocks, which is image, is markdown, is whatever actually like goes onto the website.
I was hoping you do that part. Yeah.
Because I wasn't, I was like, is that more metadata? Is that context? Is that yeah.
Well, there's a schema reader, right?
It's like you almost define a new block type that says, okay, I am having a list of blocks, and like now that gets displayed away. Like that would be one.
Yeah.
So
I think that's what I was picturing too.
the combiner block type or something.
Yep. Like a map of some
So
sort.
this is what you were pointing to forever ago, Shahruz, like the relationship between blocks and posts, right? Is this, yeah, okay.
No. Run into it head on.
You got it. I mean, we got there with a bunch more technical mumbo jumbo to stick it all. Okay, so there are.
How many times has CJ asked that?
Entire day for like weeks. I was like, I don't. This is the thing that I've never understood. Is like relationships and where do they exist? It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Type and say,
Yeah.
Just put a list of them with bullet points and it works.
So, like, yeah, there is a block type that is post. Is that? And then it's, yeah, okay. See, everything's blocks. This is what you wanted.
This is, blocks all the way down.
Yeah.
Sandwiches all the way down.
Exactly.
Sandwiches.
Sandwiches.
Like the idea of sandwich.
Yeah, so I'm also kind of curious, like how 11.2 is going to handle this, or if this is starting to get into territory where maybe we have to write some JavaScript on top of 11.2 and just have it kind of interpret or render a page, or some like GitHub script that gets triggered every time someone adds a block that just checks whether this is a post type and then goes and forms a correct document out of that or something. I guess that's kind of all.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's not outside the realm of like possibilities here. Just something very one-way, like a one-way function that accepts one of these markdown post types or post type, whatever, and then inside, we have outputted a markdown file that simply, like, in a way that's like very like not fancy at all. Went to each of these files, took the content, stuck it right on top of each other, like appended to a new file.
And if it knows it's an image, it knows how to write markdown images or whatever.
Yeah, we have a gizmo that, like, you're dropping the images on the gizmo and it's whatever, outputting we can still manually use some of that stuff. I mean, we're getting into flow now
as well. Yeah.
This is where if we start getting little building blocks, I can start playing with flow on, like, maybe we can toss it over here, and then that's a closer approximation of moving it through the system. Yeah, I just need raw material to work with for front end flow, and I can probably figure out easier ways to get things from here or there, or we can, start brainstorming on that. But for now, as chunky as possible with as many steps as necessary to get it on the thing. And we feel the friction, and then, like, from that we can sort of chisel it down, I think. Yeah, if there's like this is a like, and maybe this is a separate discussion, but, like, is there a sort of ingestion point that gives a sort of general postability, like to, like level of technical ability, ingestion point, like for each of these types, because we can all build our own, obviously. But, like, is there something that, like, we can invite somebody in and then they can make a post already without having to understand any of what we just said, right?
I imagine it's just like a buzzard.life/editor and just super clean, like tiny like little markdown buttons and just click a publish button and poof.
Okay. Like
I mean, this might be looking a little too far ahead, but it would be great to be like sign into MetaMask or something.
Yeah.
Sign like with your Ethereum address, and then that also fills the author kind of very clearly.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I mean, I can start cobbling that together once we have like an understanding of what it's hooked up to backend wise. Yeah.
API endpoint should be like relatively simple to spit out these blocks and like put them on GitHub.
Yeah, then
just kind of already have like some janky way of doing this.
Cool. Yeah, and then just what the input methodology is here, and like what we can use off the shelf. You know, like we're getting into the text area nonsense land, and I don't know how much of that has been solved since I last looked at it 2 years ago.
Even that my last week has been spent doing this for my regular job, like trying to get like little bubbles of layered text on top of each other, and like not a lot of progress has been made. Let's just say that. That'll be
seriously. This is why we're creating internet paper.
Yep.
Off of internet film. Internet camera. Okay.
But I agree. I'm definitely seeing more of a flow here, more of like pieces that they're not as like you know, like scarily like flying around the room, bouncing into walls and like freaking out. They're like in an order now, kind of like a little more sensical.
Yeah. There is somewhere in the world a text area that is connected to an MD file that's connected to a server that's connected to something else that spits out something that the future machine can read.
Beautiful.
Fine.
That's something in the future can read.
Yep.
It's a nice, yeah.
It's better that we dumped a lot of things in the GitHub repo, and maybe a machine could read it. Questionable.
Like maybe human beings can, you know, with an immense amount of effort and enough weed can like read these files. So
we had the videos recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to watch this in order to
Makes sense.
post something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to use our system.
10 users, N of 10.
Yeah.
The most intellectually daunting decentralized publishing system you've ever seen.
I don't think that this would be the most daunting.
Yeah, that's the thing. My worry is that all previous attempts at this basically end up being that. It's like that's why it doesn't exist yet, because they just get lost in these insane. Yeah.
No, I want the simple Buzzard editor. Because the magic of being able to like barf some stuff on a screen and then have it go out onto the internet is still fun. So
yeah,
it's good. I think we're
edit.buzzard.life.
There you go. See, edit your Buzzard.
Post lots of words here. Yeah.
Cool. All right, where do we go from here?
It was an interesting start to the conversation compared to where we're at now. Kristen, I think the defining moment is like, what are we talking about? What is going on?
When was that?
Well, you just need Shahruz to tell you that we're talking about a schema.
Yeah. And then from there, everything cascaded into
easy after that place.
We got a schema.
Yeah, I was having a hard time like feeling into what was going on, and Dave, you're like, I'm in it, and I'm like, okay.
Pull us in.
Where are you?
Yeah, reel us in.
All right, how do we instantiate this? What's a little next step here?
Help. I have a few things I wrote down.
Okay.
One is, so it seems like there's kind of like a few things. I think one core thing would just be like backend to consume the schema, right? Throw schema into backend, have backend produce a block on GitHub. I'm assuming the assumption that I'm making with that is that are we assuming that this will break down a markdown file into blocks, or is it going to consume purely blocks? Or are there two endpoints, one that breaks down blocks and one that just consumes blocks? Those are like the kind of, I think it could probably do both, just like for simplicity's sake for now. And then whatever interfaces we want to build on top of it, we can, but at least our block producing mechanism is there. I don't imagine that'll be that hard to do. It's more like the interfaces on top of that might take like a little bit more time, but even that can be like a simple web form that we say like, we can make that edit.buzzard.life and just say like manually enter your information.
Yeah.
Anyone's gonna post to it maliciously for now, so we don't even need off.
I mean, if they do, it'd be great.
It would be kind of hilarious. Then we'd have new
So those then get posted to GitHub? Sorry from GitHub.
sorry, actually say that again, Shahruz.
Will those then be getting posted to GitHub from that backend?
Yeah, I think add it to the GitHub repo and then maybe a GitHub action to like figure out the post type to compose the blocks. And then I think at least those are like the two backend pieces that I'm like, hit the API backend, then like GitHub action to compose it into a post. What are you thinking, John?
It's a little like the process of, I guess, making a markdown file in the repo initially or somewhere, and then dragging it to the web, like one of these converters, feels a little bit like I'm wondering if there's a way to skip that step so that you're not dealing with like the file as much at all. I guess like
writing just raw markdown in a page or something.
Maybe, yeah. Or like supporting command copy or copy paste, into like a giant web form that does that part. Like, so in other words, writing less of a pipeline for files and just getting to like an extremely dumb editor that takes in this content.
Yeah, I mean, I think that fits with the backend model, right? I think that's just a front end on top of it, but
yeah.
I think
True.
Perfectly in. So what I think, I mean, personally, I have no like attachment to any front end. So whatever front end is preferable, like we can definitely build.
Mm-hmm.
And there can be multiple, which is the nice thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that makes us super cool, because you can make all these weird or fun or easy or seamless.
Just like whatever works for whatever person. Like I don't know, do we just need like an idea room for like front end and just like write whatever you want in the idea room, and maybe it pops out, maybe it doesn't, or like we can see what is the most like what people like the most, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I like the concept of having like our 0.01 Buzzard editor thing, because then we have an like input point that is universally understandable, if not anywhere near feature anything. Yeah. Because if you're anywhere and you have a web browser, you can ideally make a post. And that's the minimum, like easiest, like conversational method with the system. And then we can maybe like start designing games around this thing, or we're starting to move in a direction. We're feeling into a direction where we can have other people come in, or something. I don't know. Or we can. That's
Okay.
just.
So just to double check, I think I like skipped ahead there. Sorry, like CJ, for the two backend components, you were saying one that takes content and takes care of the like blockification and then storing to assets, and then another part that like specifically does that for markdown files, where it like splits them. In other words, like block processing unit and a unit that like splits things into blocks and then sends it to the block processing unit.
Yeah, effectively.
EPU.
The DPU.
Yes.
Do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I look forward to the day these are like command like bash commands. It's just like type something into it, and like out comes a URL. But just it feels like, I don't know. It's getting close to that. It's amazing. Yeah.
Do we want to try to, like, what is the unit of work that we want to do over this next week, or however we want to think about this? Like, so I'm available to make front ends whenever.
I was about to say, like, just, yeah, I don't know. I imagine like writing the backend is probably not going to take more than like tomorrow, and getting it deployed on something. So after that, I think it's more thinking about like what are the front end interfaces that we're looking for. I have a server that I can put things on. If it needs to be complex, if it needs to be easy, Netlify or whatever, like anything works.
I mean, yeah, I don't know how to best coordinate this. Like, if you want to go, so are you saying like you want to go do a bit of work and then have like the sort of back end model worked out? And
a little bit, yeah.
Okay, and then
like in the meantime, just like front end stuff. I think if by next call we had like at least front end ideas, if not like a basic front end implemented, like I think we would be in a pretty like good spot.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know how much work that is actually going to be. I'm assuming it's not going to be that much, but
The back end or front end portion, I guess.
I also imagine the back end is not going to be. It's basically just consuming the schema.
Yeah, hold on. You're getting a little quiet again. What was that last question?
I just said I imagine it's not going to be a lot of work. I think it's just going to be consuming a schema. As far as like the GitHub stuff goes, I pretty much have written it in some capacity already. The GitHub action will be kind of something slightly interesting.
Yep.
Also,
I would be very down for like a coding session research, like grokking thing, maybe tomorrow night, and we just like because it is a little hard to even spec this out, but I am on the side of like this is like a day's worth of work rather than a week's worth of work for that like very, very basic pipeline. And then the front ends do feel incremental in the sense that you just build like one at a time and just ship them as they go. It's not like this grand sort of tied together project.
It'd be nice if I could sit in on that just to listen.
Okay.
Like, kind of don't know how it all sticks together, but if I have a feeling of how the back end is working, then like the easier front end solutions might pop up. Yeah. Sure. I mean, that sounds fun.
Yeah, I was going to say what time. I think tomorrow night might not be great, but if we want to do another day too, that's totally fine.
Yeah, I've probably got like some driving to do tomorrow as well. So maybe Wednesday.
Anytime in particular?
So like late evening or sorry, or late afternoon. Maybe just like start around this time right now. Just let. Yeah, like my only conflict is like work, and I'd rather like be able to just like totally finish work and then start on this rather than cutting it in half. But I can like move things around if needed.
I think that'll work better for sure. If we can. And yeah, cool.
Wednesday, 5?
Yep.
Little code sesh.
Yeah.
My foam finger that just says code. I'll sit in the background.
Write it with a Sharpie on your finger.
Well, it was like big.
Oh, you want a huge one?
Like, yeah,
code.
Okay.
Code.
Pin it that says code. Providing what I can.
Color commentary.
Cool. Anybody got anything else?
I'm excited.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna zone out now. I mean, this is good. I think we're figuring out language on the stuff. We're figuring out like how to move. Yeah,
Metaphors we're slowly working.
we're like holding the model mentally. It's getting somewhere. Some Web3 stuff is starting to peek its nose in naturally, I think. So good. Cool.
Depending on Wednesday, like if if there's not much for me to do, I can start building out like the IPFS upload box kind of thing.
That would be,
But if there's something I can jump into on the back end or the front end to help out too, just build
Yep.
it as well.
I feel like the first 30 minutes of Wednesday can probably just be like, let's build out a slightly more specific like plan and figure out what the components are and then like really just go from there. So that would be the perfect time to coordinate that.
Cool.
Sweet.
cool, like plan and distribute work for the first little bit, and then kind of move on it.
Awesome.
Cool.
We're building things. Watch out.
Watch out. The world is not ready.
Mhm.
Probably not ready.
All right, guys.
Buzzard life.
All right. There you go.
Right.
Bye.